I'd like to welcome everyone to our third NAMEPA MARPOL webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing Annex IV, which is the regulation for the prevention of pollution by sewage from ships. Some quick housekeeping things, as I mentioned before, we're going to keep our cameras and microphones turned off throughout the webinar. That allows us to keep the spotlight on our wonderful panelists that we have today. If you have any questions throughout, if anything pops up into your head that you want to talk about later, please feel free to post into the chat. We'll do some question and answer at the end of our webinar series. But today I am joined by Benton Lobo, who is the Vice President of Compliance, ISM Designated Person Ashore, DPA, for Marine Operations for Carnival Cruise Lines. So Benton, I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss what Carnival does and what your position is there.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel discussing about MARPOL and X4. Um, uh, I'm pretty sure many of you have heard about on this call. I've heard about Carnival Cruise Line. We are part of Carnival Corporation, and it's a cruise company that we're based out of Miami in Florida. We operate a fleet of ships offering vacations to destinations like the Caribbean, Mexico, Alaska, Hawaii, Europe. Basically, the bulk of our ships operate out of the continental United States. This company was founded in 1972, and as I said before, headquartered here in Miami, in Doral. W- our ships are known for its fun and lively atmosphere on board, which most of our clientele are families, couples, and groups of friends. Uh, we offer ranges of activities and amenities on board, including live entertainment, comedy shows, basically whatever a cruise ship does. Uh, we also offer team cruises, such as food and wine cruises, music cruises. As of today, we have a fleet of 24 ships, making us one of the largest cruise line operators in the world. Being a part of Carnival Corporation umbrella, we have Carnival Cruise Line is one of the 10 brands of Carnival Corporation. We have around 85 ships in the Carnival Corporation across all these 10 brands. As the Vice President of Compliance and the designated person ashore, I oversee all regulatory compliance and ISM compliance duties, including environmental compliance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're going to jump into our questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Benton, can you tell me about what Annex IV is and what it regulates? Oh, I think you might be muted there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, an Annex MARPOL Annex 4 is, regulates the discharge of sewage from ships, and it tells us, how and when. As you know, a cruise. I'm now referring to cruise ships, but besides cruise ships, we also have um, container ships and all other ships that where you have team members on board working, and we generate sewage. Annex 4 is basically the guideline on how this sewage that is generated on board can be managed, treated, and then be eventually discharged, overboard. So.
Okay, wonderful. And what is what waste is generated on board? So we have a lot of people who talk about black water and gray water. Can you talk about what's characterized within Annex IV, the difference between black and gray water?
Yeah, so black water is basically water that is, generated from the toilets and from the medical centers. That's what is MARPOL. That's how MARPOL defines black water as. And gray water is water from laundries, from the galleys, from bathrooms, from the housekeeping areas. So that is gray water. And but however, for the purpose of MARPOL Annex 4 sewage, it's only water that is from the toilets and the medical centers, if you have a medical center on board a ship.
Okay. And what is allowed to be discharged and where? What is that regulation of how far out can sewage be discharged under Annex 4?
So it depends upon what is the treatment system on board, right? So if you don't have a treatment system on board, MARPOL allows you to discharge raw sewage. And of course, if you're not in a special area, right? So you can discharge treated sewage outside 3 nautical miles. If you're in a normal area, it is you can again, it depends on the area, so you can discharge outside 4 nautical miles from the nearest land. If you have a communicating device on board, if you have a treatment system on board that's certified as per the MEPC 4, that is, if it's a type approved system, MARPOL also allows you to discharge this treated sewage when you're at port, or any countries that are signatories to MARPOL Annex 4, you can discharge sewage also when you're at port. Then you also have additional, systems called as advanced wastewater processing systems, where you can discharge sewage, up to standards of what you treat them at land. So.
Okay. With MARPOL Annex 1 with oil, there's the oiled record book. Is there any documentation required for when you're discharging with Annex 4?
MARPOL Annex 4 does not really require you to have, a logbook, but there are certain um, um, states, port states like the United States Coast Guard, or in the United States, you are required to have a sewage discharge book, and so to comply with all these different regulations across the world, we do normally maintain. All companies, they need to have, they require to have a sewage and gray water discharge book. Basically, since we are talking about MARPOL Annex 4, yeah, we talk about sewage
Hmm.
record book, yeah. But
Okay.
regulatory wise, you're not required to
Hmm.
maintain as per MARPOL Annex 4.
Okay. And you mentioned some of those treatment systems that are on board. Can you kind of discuss a bit what those treatment systems are, what they do, the different ones that different vessels may have on board?
Yeah, so let me talk about the most common treatment system that we have on board. That's the marine sanitation device. All right. So the marine sanitation device that we have on board is designed to treat. The main purpose of a system, or these systems, as I said before, is to prevent pollution of the sea by properly treating the sewage before discharged into the ocean. Typically, the treatment system involves different stages. The first stage is screening, where the sewage is first screened to remove larger solid particles and debris, and which may clog the treatment equipment. Then you have the primary treatment, where the sewage passes through the settling tank, where the heavier solids settle down to the bottom and lighter particles float to the surface, and this process removes a significant amount of organic and inorganic solids from the sewage. Then you have a secondary treatment, where the liquid is then further treated using biological processes to remove the dissolved organic matter. And this is usually achieved through the use of aerobic bacteria that break down the organic matter in the sewage into simpler, harmless compound. And this process is called, in layman's term, it's called activated sludge process, and it's similar to sewage treatment plants on land-based facilities. And then finally, you have the disinfection, where finally the treated sewage is disinfected to kill any remaining bacteria and viruses, including by introducing chemical like chlorine, or by exposing the sewage to any other disinfection methods like ultraviolet light. And once the sewage has been treated, then you can discharge this, as I said before, at per MARPOL Annex 4, even if the ship is in port. Yeah.
Okay. And what are you typically seeing? What kind of sewage treatment systems are you typically seeing on our Carnival ships?
So, uh, as per MARPOL, many of our ships have the traditional marine sanitation device, but now as part of our sustainability goals, we are and to be up to date with our industry best management practices, we are installing advanced wastewater processing systems. And these advanced waste processing systems, where we go above and beyond the marine sanitation devices, and we go above and beyond MARPOL, and we basically, the treatment systems are advanced. They are, they are membrane systems. They are, high-end biological treatment systems where the different stages there are different stages of treatment systems, and then once the final effluent is the most higher standards in the industry. So we are installing all our new ships today have state-of-the-art advanced wastewater processing systems, which go above and beyond MARPOL. Now, I also previously spoke about the requirements to discharge, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that as per MARPOL, you can discharge a treated sewage from the marine sanitation device when in port. But most of the companies, including Carnival Cruise Line, we have our internal policy that treated sewage, even if it is treated, we always discharge these outside 12 nautical miles from nearest land, that is in international waters.
Mm-hmm.
So all treated sewage, it's discharged and is discharged outside 12 nautical miles. Uh, Even though MARPOL today allows untreated sewage to be discharged overboard, as a company, it's a policy, and many other companies' policies, and it's a policy also of CLIA, that's the governing body of cruise lines, where we do not discharge untreated sewage into the sea.
Uh, and that untreated sewage and that raw sewage can have a huge effect on the marine environment. Can you kind of touch on what that effect might be, how it affects the marine environment, how it may infect coastal communities with that untreated sewage being discharged if it was in 3 nautical miles or 12 nautical miles?
Yeah, so raw sewage can have significant impact on the marine environment, right? When untreated sewage is discharged into the ocean, it introduces high level of nutrients, pathogens, and organic matter that can alter the chemistry and the ecology of the water, and in turn, harm marine life. Now, one of the most immediate impacts is the depletion of oxygen levels in the water. The bacteria that break down the organic matter in sewage consume oxygen as they metabolize, leading to low oxygen or no oxygen conditions in the water that can suffocate the marine organisms. So this is particularly damaging in coastal areas and areas where water circulation is limited, and that's why, we MARPOL also prohibits discharge of untreated sewage uh, at certain distances, right? So the nutrients in sewage, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, can also cause harmful algae blooms, and these blooms can cause toxic conditions that can harm or kill marine fish, such as fish or shellfish. And that's one of the reasons why we have our treatment system in place, which will eliminate these effects,
Mhm.
and that's why we need to treat sewage.
And those effects can be felt all the way up to us.
Yep.
And you had talked on some special areas, special no discharge areas. Can you talk about what those are? And on a follow up on that, those special areas, do you see an introduction of more stringent and more areas being introduced in the next coming years?
Yeah. So there are special areas in MARPOL Annex IV, right? We have general areas where we follow the basic MARPOL regulations, and then we have designated special areas. Currently, we have today 6 designated special areas under MARPOL Annex IV, which are the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, the Antarctic area, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. These are mostly areas in the European subcontinent. And these areas are considered particularly vulnerable to pollution, and therefore have stricter sewage discharge requirements to protect their marine ecosystems. Um, in future, it's possible that we may have more special areas under MARPOL Annex 4, And this is the reason, and these are being discussed at the IMO level, the International Maritime Organization level, who are constantly reviewing and updating the regulation to protect the marine environment. Um, and if as per discussions at the IMO, we may have more special areas in future.
Mhm. And what else do you think could be done under this annex to protect the marine environment, make it more sustainable, help with these special areas that we're discussing? Is there anything else that you see that needs to be rethought over and to have a bit more regulation on within Annex 4?
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of talks at the IMO level. Some of them, at the moment, MARPOL Annex IV does set a minimum discharge standards from sewage and ships, but these standards could be more stringent to further tighten the marine, to further protect the marine environment. As I said, the cruise industry today goes above and beyond MARPOL, and we do not discharge untreated sewage. We Our policies are to discharge treated sewage only outside 12 nautical miles if you have a normal marine sanitation device. So, and cruise ships basically is just a tiny component of the whole marine industry, right? So you have a lot of ships, who comply with MARPOL today, and who must comply with MARPOL today. However, there could be improvements, and I know that there are discussions at the IMO level to tighten the regulations to further make these regulations more stringent. Um, and I know also there are alternative technologies to to reduce the impact of sewage on the marine environment. It's important to support the development of these alternative technologies. Today, we also spoke previously about the AWWTS, that's the Advanced Wastewater Processing System. These systems today, besides treating uh, sewage, we also treat gray water. So it's a component that is treated together.
Do you see that being added into Annex 4? Do you see that being added into other regulations? Where do you see gray water kind of falling if black water's more what Annex 4 is focusing on?
Yeah, there is that's a very good question. I would say there's a big debate on whether gray water could be make its way into a own separate annex or whether it could be included. There are different views of different port states. There is at the moment there is really no consensus on which side they would go.
Mhm.
But irrespective of which way gray water or it would be, I'm sure that there would be tighter regulations in future for
Mhm.
gray water, which would include gray water standards. Yeah.
Mhm. Now, with our bigger ships, we're getting larger cruise ships. We're getting larger vessels that are transporting goods and services across the ocean. Are we going to have to kind of update the regulations to maintain compliance with those larger ships and with the larger bulk that's being carried across the ocean?
Yes, regulations will need to be updated. And today we also have additional regulations for cruise ships, in special areas where, like, for example, the Baltic. Cruise ships going to the Baltic must discharge using AWWTS, Advanced Wastewater Processing System, or you have areas like Alaska, where if you want to discharge in those areas, we need to have Alaska certified Advanced Wastewater Processing Systems. So regulations, keep on getting updated, and they will get updated in future.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep. And waste management on board a ship is almost a full-time job for a lot of crew members. So keeping it up to date with those regulations is important.
that's
Um,
correct.
do you know if there's anything better that we can do as a maritime industry, as the cruise industry in specific, with regards to Annex 4? Anywhere that we should improve?
Yeah, one of the uh, what we can do today is to support innovation and support new technologies. There are a lot of technologies on land-based facilities today, where uh, which work pretty fine, and it doesn't mean that it would work in a marine environment on a ship. But what we could do as an industry if to explore what's going on land-based facilities and see how we could have them fitted on a ship. Of course, there are different factors that need to be considered when you're fitting equipment on a ship, like space. Space is one of the most important ingredient which we consider when we install these new equipments. But it's important that we support innovation and support new technologies.
Mhm. Annex 4 is kind of a quiet annex. Not many people hear about it. There's not too much press on it. What can we do to kind of increase the awareness of the annex and kind of get it more into the front view of what people are learning about, whether it's in training? I know as a mass maritime grad, I went through a MARPOL class, and we talked about Annex 4, but it wasn't incredibly talked about because a lot of people don't see it as such a large issue. But what can we do to kind of raise awareness for Annex 4?
Um, I think having and when we talk about in the marine industry, every company and every company in the industry should have some uh, courses or content or discussions even at the university levels. There should be Marpol and X4 should be important. I know a lot of people talk about NX1 and NX6, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the most common discussion of the annexes in Marpol that but Annex 4 also becomes important, especially for the cruise industry, because here we are talking about on a cruise ship we have anytime between 4,000 to 10,000 people on board, depending upon the size of the ship. And imagine the amount of the quantity of sewage and gray water that generated, and we need to hold all that water and treat all that water and discharge overboard. So it also is a question of holding capacity. So at least for the cruise industry, Marpol and X4 is very very important, and it's an important factor we take when designing our ships.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas for the I cannot speak much for the other for the other industries in the sectors, but I think they also for sure would be taking Marpol Next 4 into consideration when designing their safety management systems. So
Mm-hmm.
um, yep.
And what kind of training do you have within Carnival Cruises, within this annex and Marpol in general?
So we all our team members, on board the ship need to be aware of MARPOL and the different annexes. And typically for a cruise ship, out of all the six annexes, we are involved or need to comply with MARPOL Annex 1, MARPOL Annex 4, 5, and 6. MARPOL 2 and 3 don't apply to cruise ships. They are more to cargo ships and chemical cargo ships or chemical containers. So we do train our team members on these aspects of Marpol Annex 1. What does it mean for our ships? What do their duties involve? Marpol Annex 4 sewage, also 5 and 6. When it comes specifically to Marpol Annex 4, we have different levels of training, right? One is the general awareness training for all the team members, um, and for the general team on board, like we have any cruise ship would have any time between 600 to 1,200 crew members on board, and everyone need to know about all of them need to know about what happens to the sewage that's generated on board, and simple educative material like do not do not put like uh, solid articles into the any item that would block the toilet bowls, to having posters about Marpol and X4 in dedicated designated areas of the ship. And then we talk about technical related trainings to the engineers who operate the equipments. They have dedicated trainings on how they have to operate the equipment, maintain the equipment, and to the bridge officers who, need to know when you can give the green light to discharge the treated sewage overboard. So there are different levels of trainings when it comes to this whole operation surrounding Marpol NX 4. Yeah.
And we talked about discharging overboard, but are there reception facilities in port for this? And are they up to the standard that they need to be?
Y- yes, whenever we select a waste vendor to discharge sewage, we need to make sure, at least as a company, we have a policy that we do a due diligence of the vendor who takes our sewage, and we do due diligence to cross check and verify that the waste vendor is following all the local regulations, whichever port we go to, whether it's in a port in the United States or in the Caribbean or in Europe. So we do a due diligence before selecting a vendor on giving our waste to them or discharging the waste to their facilities, which includes sewage, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Where do you see the regulations that we have on Annex 4 going? In what direction are they going in? And where do you think is improvement is needed within those? And what are we seeing happening within the talks with IMO, within the talks in the maritime industry and the cruise industry?
Yeah. So, as we spoke a little bit about designated more special areas.
Hmm.
I see that that happening in the near future. Designated more MARPOL Annex IV special areas. um, we also there's a lot of talk about gray water, as I said before, being incorporated in MARPOL Annex 4, coming as a separate annex, but eventually it would need to be tied together because if we need to treat gray water, we would need to put an advanced wastewater processing system on board,
Hmm.
where would treat both the sewage as well as gray water. There's also a lot of talks going on about microplastics in gray water, and regulating microplastics. We are far from yet coming to a finalized regulation,
Hmm.
and also having better treatment systems on board, moving away from the traditional marine sanitation devices that most of the ships in the marine industry have today. So.
Hmm. Are we treating for microplastics currently within black water and gray water, or
No,
not yet? Not
no,
yet.
not yet. No, there's we are not. Yeah.
Yeah, those are some big jumps that we will hopefully get to within the next few years.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and do you think there need to be more education on MARPOL Annex 4?
I beg your pardon?
Do you think there needs to be more education on MARPOL, specifically Annex 4, any of the other annexes? Are we seeing enough stress done on the education about these prior to going into the workforce or throughout mariners' careers?
Yeah, as a mariner, I believe all of them go through Marpol and X4 basic education. But then, Marpol and X4, anyway, the implementation of the annexes on board a ship depends upon the type of equipment that they have again,
Hmm.
right? So we cannot really have a generic course, an in-depth generic course for Marpol and X4. It would need to be equipment specific or ship specific. What we can have generically is just basic Marpol rules about, how you have to, what was the distance where you can discharge from and all those regulations. But if you want to go have an in-depth, in-depth uh, education, it would need to be equipment specific.
Okay. Are you seeing any non-compliance issues within Annex 4 throughout the maritime industry? Is there anything specific that you have seen over your years working in the maritime industry of non-compliance?
I've not heard of any major enforcements, unlike Marpol NX1 and NX6, because uh, it's pretty simple. The Marpol NX4 regulations, it is that uh, the ship, uh, and I think I can read out to you what Marpol NX4 says and how simple it is today, you know and it says uh, the ship is discharging comminuted and disinfected sewage using a system approved by the administration in accordance with Regulation 9.1.2 of this annex at a distance of more than 3 nautical miles from the nearest land, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a if you have a device that just communicates and disinfects, not even a treatment system, if you have a device that communicates, crushes the sewage and just disinfects it, you have up to 3 nautical miles to discharge the sewage. And of course, this system must be approved by flag states, right? Approved by
Mm-hmm.
the administration or sewage that is not comminuted or disinfected at a distance of more than 12 nautical miles from the nearest land, provided that in any case the sewage has been stored in holding tanks or sewage originating from spaces containing living animals shall not be discharged instantaneously but at a moderate rate when the ship is en route and proceeding at a speed less than 4 knots. So if you don't have a sewage system on board, as long as you are moving en route and at a speed of not less than 4 knots, you can discharge this untreated sewage into the sea outside 12 nautical miles. So it's the regulation is pretty simple currently the way it is, right? And then the second bullet point where I mentioned if you have a treatment system, the marine sanitation device that we spoke about, if the ship has an operation an approved sewage treatment plant, which has been certified by the administration to meet the operational requirements referred to in Regulation 9.1.1 of this annex, that means if you have the marine sanitation device, you can also discharge in port. So it's the regulations are pretty simple if you're operating in a general area other
Mm-hmm.
than the special areas, and that's why you don't see any real incidents related to or issues related to MARPOL and X4 as of today.
Now, you had said that you had to, when you're discharging raw sewage out of 12 nautical miles, you had to be moving at least 4 knots. Is there a specific reason for that?
It's because when you're moving at to ensure that the ship, the sewage is spread, at an area, the raw sewage,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you need to be at a certain speed to ensure that the raw sewage that you're discharging is not collected in one area; it's spread over a wider
Mm-hmm.
area, and you're outside at high seas, outside 12 nautical miles. Yeah,
Okay, so that open ocean, it gives it time to kind of process it and metabolize that raw sewage that's been
yeah,
discharged there.
yeah.
And finally, this is a question that I had. I was doing some research on Annex 4 and I saw that there were rates of disposal. Can you kind of talk about what that means, what the numbers are behind the rates of disposal within Annex 4?
Yeah. So the rates of disposal is basically um, and this rates of disposal only applies to untreated sewage, right?
Okay.
So uh, um, and these rates must be approved by the classification society who acts on behalf of the administration, right? It depends on what is the type of pump you have to
Mm-hmm.
discharge and the speed of the ship, right? So
Okay.
at a certain, so it just tells you the rate of the rate of disposal certificate is a certificate that it's an approved certificate you receive from the classification society that tells you at this speed, if the ship is proceeding at say 6 knots, your rate of disposal can be at a minimum, say, I'm just putting a number, 6 cubic meters an hour. Or
Okay.
if your ship is proceeding at 10 knots, it can be at a higher rate. So and again, I said that this rate is calculated based on uh, you know how we expect that the sewage, untreated sewage, can be spread over a wider area, not collected in one area of the ship.
Okay. All right. So we do have a little time left. I'm going to see if anyone here has any questions before we wrap up this afternoon in the chat. Not seeing anyone yet posting anything. We'll give. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, Benton, that you want to discuss within Annex 4?
Um, no, I mean, I think we have covered a lot in this Annex 4, and like you also mentioned before, Annex 4 is one of the less spoken annexes in MARPOL, but you will see over the years the rules and regulations are going to get more stringent. You'll have more requirements coming into force. We're going to be ending up talking about gray water in MARPOL. When it's going to happen, and microplastics. These are some
Mhm.
interesting topics that we will are being currently discussed, and you will see in the regs in future.
Right, wonderful. Does anyone have any questions here with us today? Anyone attending the webinar this afternoon? Right, well then I will share my screen once again. So if you enjoyed this webinar, and I want to thank Benton so much for joining us this afternoon discussing our MARPOL Annex 4. We have some more annexes coming up and some other topics. Our next is our Safety at Sea Mariner Welfare, which is taking place on May 10th. You can register at the same place that you registered for this MARPOL webinar series. As I said earlier, this will be posted onto our YouTube page, and the link will be sent out afterwards. So if there was anyone who wasn't able to join us this afternoon but really wanted to come, you can share it with them. Also coming up May 18th, you can find more information about this as well on our website. We have our Safety at Sea seminar taking place in Washington, D.C. You can see the agenda, who's going to be speaking, the form, and we also have the AMVER Awards taking place after that seminar. July 14th, we'll be talking Annex 5, and we have some other interesting topics, and November and December's dates will be posted soon. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us this afternoon. If you would like to be MARPOL Operation Compliance Training Assessment certified, you can scan this QR code and take our MARPOL Operation Compliance Assessment. That covers all of MARPOL, all the 6 annexes, not just Annex 1 and not just Annex 4. You can take this test, and we will send you a certificate in about 2 to 3 business days afterwards, and it will give you a certificate that you are learning to save our seas. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email Carlene, who is our CEO, Lynn Harris, who's our Chief Operating Officer, or Molly Duche, who is our Education and Outreach Director. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask them now. Benton, I know you have a hard stop at 4, so we'll get you out before then. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.